Imagine a tree, 25 meters tall, its trunk so wide it takes 10 people with arms outstretched to embrace it, standing alone in land that sees no rain for 9 months. This is not folklore, this is the baobab, a living organism that has stood on the African continent since long before humanity learned to grow grain. A single mature baobab can hold 100,000 liters of water inside its trunk, enough to fill close to 1,000 bathtubs at the same time. But the real mystery isn't the water it holds, it's that this tree has endured for over 2,000 years, without fertile soil, without abundant rain, without anything we assume a tree needs to survive. What is happening inside a tree that looks half dead, yet is quietly sustaining an entire ecosystem within its own body? Sub-Saharan Africa endures some of the harshest climate on land, dry seasons, stretching 6 to 9 consecutive months, daytime temperatures routinely climbing past 40 degrees Celsius. In that environment, most trees retreat, shrink, or simply die. Yet the baobab does the opposite, swelling and standing firm. 8 species of baobab exist on Earth, 6 confined to Madagascar, 1 in Australia, and just 1 species spanning the entire African continent, Adansonia digitata. Adansonia digitata is the largest, oldest, and most studied, ranging from the Sahel in the north to southern Africa, from the Atlantic coast clear across to the Indian Ocean. The baobab has a silhouette unlike any other tree on Earth, a bottle-swollen trunk and branches that splay outward like roots turned upside down toward the sky. Local people call it the upside-down tree, and legend says the gods plucked it from the earth and replanted it in reverse, a punishment for its arrogance. That strange form is no accident. It is the result of over 300 million years of evolution, shaped by drought, carved by survival. Unlike conventional hardwood trees, the baobab's interior isn't dense timber. It is a soft, fibrous, sponge-like tissue that absorbs and retains water with remarkable efficiency. The trunk swells visibly in the wet season as it fills with water, then contracts through the dry months as reserves are drawn down, its circumference shifting by as much as 30% within a single year. Scientists at the University of the Witwatersrand used ultrasound equipment to track weekly trunk diameter changes, confirming that the baobab genuinely breathes in seasonal rhythm. This survival strategy, storing water directly in living tissue, mirrors the way a camel stores fat in its hump, but scaled to the architecture of a colossal plant. And it isn't just drought. Baobabs withstand floods, savanna fires, and even elephants driving their tusks into the trunk to reach the water inside, then regenerate completely. Its bark can be stripped away entirely, and then regenerate a capacity for self-renewal, found in no other large tree species on the planet. Maasai communities and others across Africa have harvested this bark for thousands of years to weave rope and fiber while the tree continues to live on, entirely unharmed. It is precisely this regenerative power that has carried the baobab through massive climate shifts that erased entire forests around it. Scientists using radiocarbon dating have found that many baobabs alive today were already growing during the era of ancient Rome, more than 2,000 years ago. What makes dating baobabs so complex is that the trunk forms no annual growth rings. There are no wooden circles to count, no internal record of years past. Instead, Romanian researcher Adrian Petrut extracted wood samples from multiple points on a single tree, then used accelerator mass spectrometry to measure residual carbon-14 in each sample. Results showed trees in South Africa and Zimbabwe, ranging from 1,500 to 2,500 years old, making them the longest-lived organisms on the African continent. Yet since 2005, at least 9 of the 13 largest and oldest baobabs on the continent have died, and the question of why still has no fully satisfying answer. Before modern science turned its instruments on the baobab, communities who had lived beside it for thousands of years understood this tree more intimately than any laboratory. The San of the Kalahari, the Himba of Namibia, the Dogon of Mali, all place the baobab at the living axis of their world, a landmark woven into geography, memory, and spirit. Baobab fruit contains 6 times more vitamin C than orange, twice the calcium of cow's milk, and more dietary fiber than most common grains. Dissolved in water, baobab fruit powder creates a tangy drink used by local communities for centuries as a natural electrolyte in the driest heat, long before bottled sports drinks existed. Baobab seeds contain up to 25% oil, rich in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, confirmed by food chemists to benefit cardiovascular health on a level comparable to olive oil. These nutritional qualities led the European Union in 2008 to officially approve baobab powder as a novel food, clearing it for sale across European markets. But nutritional value is only the smallest fraction of what the baobab provides for. The tree itself is a miniature ecosystem, simultaneously sustaining dozens of other species. Ecologists at the University of Pretoria documented over 300 animal species using a single baobab tree throughout one annual cycle, from mammals to insects to fungi. Natural hollows in the trunk and branches become nesting sites for dozens of creatures, from large barn owls to tiny agama lizards, all living in layered apartments within the same building. In the soil surrounding the base, scientists have found an unusually dense mycorrhizal network, linking the baobab to smaller trees nearby and transferring nutrients in multiple directions. This means the baobab isn't merely sustaining itself, it is functioning as a central nutrient distribution hub for the entire surrounding landscape. When the baobab sheds its leaves in the dry season, decomposing leaf litter falls directly to the base and adds a significant pulse of organic matter into the nutrient-depleted savanna soil below. This creates a closed loop. The tree stores water. Water sustains the fungal network. The network transfers nutrients. Nutrients grow the tree larger, and the larger tree stores still more water. And at the heart of that cycle is the baobab flower, one of the largest and strangest blossoms in African flora. Opening only after dark, baobab flowers reach 12 centimeters across and emit a scent resembling rotting flesh, precisely engineered to attract the specialized nocturnal pollinators that work in darkness. The baobab's primary pollinators are not bees or butterflies, but fruit bats of the genus Epimetheus, nocturnal travelers that fly tens of kilometers each night in search of these blooms. If bat populations decline, the baobab cannot be pollinated, produces no fruit, and the entire nutritional web it anchors begins to unravel. This is what ecologists call a foundation species, a single organism whose loss would trigger the collapse of the entire ecosystem built around it. The same web of dependency exists with the elephant, the largest land animal on Earth, and the bond between them is so ancient and intricate it has surprised even seasoned researchers. But to fully understand that bond, we need to move deeper, not into the savanna around it, but into the living interior of the tree itself. Inside a large baobab, the hollow space can hold dozens of standing adults, and local communities have used these chambers across centuries in ways that are genuinely astonishing. In Zimbabwe, archaeological evidence shows prehistoric people sheltering inside baobab hollows at least 3,000 years ago, long before any constructed buildings existed in the region. During the colonial era, several enormous baobabs in South Africa served as prisons, storage warehouses, and even one functioning post office operating entirely within a living trunk. Yet human occupation of these hollows causes no harm to the tree, because the cavities themselves are not disease. They are the controlled, deliberate outcome of natural aging. As the baobab ages, its central core gradually decays back into the earth, while the outer living tissue continues expanding outward, forming a vast living cylinder of bark and fiber. This is precisely why ring counting cannot age a baobab. The core, where the oldest wood memory would be stored, has long since dissolved back into the ground. Instead of carrying its age in wood rings, the baobab carries it in biochemistry, in isotope ratios of carbon stamped into each tissue layer like an invisible timestamp. The baobab's water absorption isn't as simple as a sponge soaking up liquid. It is a multi-layered physiological process involving several distinct regulatory mechanisms working in concert. Baobab roots operate as two distinct systems: a shallow lateral network spreading 30 meters outward to catch surface rain, and a deep taproot driving down to access underground water tables. Within 48 hours of heavy rainfall, a mature baobab can absorb up to 1,000 liters of water and distribute it through trunk tissue via a sophisticated internal pressure system. Water is held in living tissue cells by osmotic pressure, meaning the tree doesn't passively hold water like a container, but actively regulates its release according to metabolic demand. At the hottest point of day, the baobab closes every stomata on its leaves to prevent water loss, to the tree equivalent of shutting every window at noon to keep the heat out. Photosynthesis is concentrated in the cool early morning and late afternoon, then metabolic activity drops to near zero at midday, preserving maximum water reserves through the peak heat. When the dry season reaches its peak, the baobab drops every leaf, cutting off all water loss and entering a state close to hibernation, its slow heartbeat continuing beneath the bark. During this botanical hibernation, all energy is supplied by breaking down sugars and starches stored in the spongy wood tissue. No photosynthesis, no gas exchange required. Then, when the first clouds of the wet season appear on the horizon, a subtle shift in atmospheric humidity alone is enough to trigger the baobab back into leaf within 48 hours. Scientists call this capacity hydrotropism response, an exquisitely moisture-sensitive mechanism the tree has refined across millions of years of adaptation. And it isn't just the tree's interior that responds. The entire surrounding ecosystem wakes in synchrony with the baobab, as if following a shared biological clock. Spiders string their silk between branches, bees return to harvest pollen from new blooms, lizards reclaim the bark crevices, all simultaneously, all following a sequence programmed over millions of years. But among all the species that depend on the baobab, the one most critical to shaping this tree's future is not the bat, nor the bird, nor the insect. It is the elephant at once, the baobab's most destructive force and its most indispensable guardian. The African elephant is the baobab's most destructive natural adversary, using tusks and trunk to strip bark for water, bore into the trunk, and sometimes push entire trees over to consume the inner pulp. In high-density elephant areas, like Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe, baobabs have been observed surviving trunk damage. So complete the tree is essentially hollow all the way through. Yet those same elephant impacts those violent thrustings of tusk into bark inadvertently create new hollow chambers that will house dozens of bird and small mammal species for centuries. The elephant is also the baobab's most vital seed disperser, swallowing whole fruit, digesting the soft pulp, then depositing seeds kilometers away inside a rich parcel of fertilizer. Without elephants, baobab seeds struggle to germinate. Their outer shell is so hard, it requires mechanical abrasion or digestive acid to crack before the seedling can emerge. This means if elephant populations vanish, the baobab loses its most effective seed dispersal partner and will gradually fail to replace aging trees as they die. The elephant damages the baobab, yet also plants it, a relationship ecologists call facilitation through disturbance. One of ecology's most beautiful paradoxes. Similar dynamics exist with baboons that eat and drop seeds directly below the crown, with mongooses aerating the soil around roots, and with hundreds of insect species reshaping the bark ecosystem. One wild honeybee species, Apis mellifera monticola, of the highland zones of Kenya and Tanzania, shows a strong preference for nesting inside baobab hollows above any other tree species. Kenyan communities have long exploited this preference by placing managed hives within baobab hollows, and honey, harvested from baobab-dwelling colonies, is prized for its distinctive flavor and quality. But not every species that uses the baobab benefits the tree. Parasitic, fungi and pathogens target aging individuals and can kill even the most ancient of specimens. Adrian Patrut's research, published in 2018 in Nature Plants, identified that many ancient baobabs have died from a combination of fungal infection and prolonged drought linked to climate change. More troubling still, the rate at which ancient individuals are dying now outpaces the rate at which younger trees can replace them, leaving ecological gaps that widen with each passing decade. Young baobabs have extremely low survival rates in the wild. Most are eaten before they grow large enough to defend themselves, and it takes hundreds of years for a tree to fully assume its ecological role. Scientists estimate only 1 in 10,000 baobab seeds that germinate will survive long enough to become a mature tree, contributing fully to the ecosystem. This is why each ancient baobab, standing today, represents a victory of vanishingly small probability, maintained across 2,000 years of climatic instability and disease. And there is something scientists have only discovered in the past decade. Baobabs don't just store water, they store carbon, with greater efficiency than most tropical rainforest tree species. A large baobab can lock away up to 12 tons of carbon in its biomass, more than double the carbon stored by a European oak of equivalent age. Every ancient baobab that dies releases not just the loss of Africa's longest-lived organism. It releases tons of carbon stored over millennia back into the atmosphere in a single event. This creates a scientific paradox. Climate change is killing baobabs, and as baobabs die, they release carbon that accelerates climate change further, forming a dangerous positive feedback loop. This is the question scientists at the African Natural Resources Institute are debating most urgently: whether the baobab can adapt fast enough to match the pace of contemporary global warming. But a completely unexpected finding published in 2021 changed how we understand the entire baobab story, and it began with a DNA analysis technique. Geneticists at the University of Cape Town analyzed DNA from hundreds of baobabs across the continent and found that many trees appearing as a single trunk are actually multiple genetically distinct individuals fused together, meaning what appears to be one baobab may actually be 2, 3, or even 5 genetically distinct individuals that grew close together as seedlings and slowly fused their trunks over centuries. When two trunks fuse, the bark tissue of each individual doesn't fight the other. It reorganizes to create a shared structure that is more stable, more durable, and far harder to topple than either tree alone. This is why the largest and oldest baobabs so often display complex multi-stemmed forms. They are not one giant organism, but an alliance of multiple beings that chose to exist together. The Segol Big Tree in Limpopo, South Africa, measured as the world's largest baobab by circumference at 33.12 meters, is actually an assembly of at least 2 individuals fused thousands of years ago. This finding overturns a fundamental botanical assumption that the boundary of an individual organism must coincide with the boundary of a single physical body. Like the mycorrhizal network Suzanne Simard described as the Wood Wide Web, the baobab reminds us that the boundary between I and we in the living world is far more blurred than we assumed. And this leads to a philosophical question ecologists cannot avoid: if the baobab can merge its genetic identity to survive better, what does it teach us about the nature of individuality itself? The baobab existed before the Roman Empire, before Islam, before Christianity, a silent witness to the entire recorded span of human civilization. Watching from the same patch of earth, baobabs in Zimbabwe bear carved marks from the era of the Great Zimbabwe Civilization. 11th century inscriptions still recognizable on the regenerated outer bark of living trees. Explorer David Livingstone carved his name into a baobab in Zambia in 1855, and that tree is alive today, carrying his inscription on its bark like a healed scar. All of this means that inside every ancient baobab standing today is a biological memory of an entire landscape, storing not just water and carbon, but the imprints of time itself. The scientific community is slowly recognizing that protecting baobabs is not simply protecting a tree species, it is protecting the entire web of ecological relationships it anchors. In Senegal, the government enshrined the baobab in heritage conservation law as early as 1960, prohibiting the felling of any baobab without specific governmental authorization. Yet in many other countries, agricultural expansion and urbanization continue to threaten baobab populations, particularly across the Sahel, where cultivatable land grows ever scarcer. But there are encouraging signals. Local communities, particularly women in Burkina Faso and Mali, are harvesting and selling baobab fruit powder as a sustainable alternative income source. When a baobab becomes an economic asset for a community, it becomes a tree worth protecting rather than clearing. A lesson conservation programs worldwide are now actively learning from. With the rise of global superfoods markets, demand for baobab products grew eightfold in the decade, from 2010 to 2020, channeling new financial resources toward conservation. Yet the equation is not simply economic. Even if all felling stopped today, climate change is altering temperature and rainfall patterns faster than baobabs can adapt to them. And in that, we see a circle closing with painful completeness. The very species that sheltered beneath baobabs for thousands of years is now inadvertently pulling them down through its own emissions. The baobab never knew how long it would endure. When it first pushed upward from a seed in dry earth, it only ever did one thing: absorb, grow, and open its doors to whatever needed shelter. For 2,000 years, it has been home to bats and birds, water reserve for elephants, shelter for human generations, axis of an ecosystem, carbon archive, and the quiet keeper of African history. It achieved all of this not by fighting its environment, but by redesigning itself to become an indispensable part of the environment itself. And as we begin to lose these trees, we are not losing a species. We are removing nails one by one from a bridge that has held firm for 2,000 years. Each ancient tree that falls takes with it hundreds of dependent species, tons of stored carbon, and geographic and cultural memory that cannot be recreated within several coming centuries. But the baobab endures those that remain, still drinking in every wet season, still opening their night flowers, still permitting hundreds of creatures to call them home. So the question is not whether the baobab can endure it, already has, for 2,000 years, in land that would break most living things. The question is whether we deserve the patience of a tree that has always kept its doors open,